The first item on our agenda for this work session is the agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve this agenda for
So
tonight?
moved, Madam Chair.
Dr. Coleman, Ms. Carter, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The next is to amend the agenda because I just ran out of time and could not get the special presentations ready for tonight, but I will work on it and get it ready for the first meeting in January. So is there a motion to amend the agenda? Deleting item 4. Thank you, Dr. Nellis. Is there a motion to?
Okay, move to amend the agenda.
Dr. Nellis, Ms. Carter, thank you.
Are you buying us some special gifts for special presentations?
No, not tonight. Any further discussion? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. So that takes us to our one item for tonight's agenda, which is the volunteer policy review. You know that the Equity Task Force presented to us a detailed report with some expectations that we would review their recommendations, and I thought the 4 things that they listed I would remind people of. Our students are best served with a diverse and engaged volunteer population. The current policy prevents an equitable and inclusive learning environment. The current policy disproportionately impacts our African American community. The volunteer policy is too restrictive. The board should review and update it accordingly. They also had recommendations for a process for review by the school board that includes a list of factors to be used in evaluating a volunteer application, such as the nature of the felony or felonies, how long ago the felony occurred, whether the obligations of the conviction, parole, probation, community service have been completed, and other factors, a specific timeline for the process to be completed, the recommendation, preferably 60 days, a communication process to keep applicants informed throughout the process. It takes a majority of the board to move forward with any kind of process, whether it's policy change, and so at this time I'm going to give board members the opportunity to share what they think in terms of the board movement on this. I will ask that we go in order so that everybody will be given the opportunity to speak. Ms. Evans, would you like to start on your feelings?
So, I'm in favor of a change. I'm not in favor of completely removing the language of, I think one of them said, maybe option 3 was anyone, have the language completely be gone. I'm not in favor of that. I am in favor of it becoming a case-by-case basis. I don't want it just to say if a prior felon, you're off the table regardless of situation or when it was or what it was. I'm a big believer in second chances, and that's the way I'm leaning.
Dr. Gupta?
On the second one, I'm in favor of changing it. Dr. Edwards, when she did a straw poll, I opted for option 2. Only thing in option 2, I like a clear language in terms of violent felons and sexual offenders. That should be clearly stated there, that if you are a violent felon or any type of sexual crime, you are out. There's no superintendent discretion at that point in time. That should be here written as part of this option. Why? Because I saw a parent the other day when they made a presentation. The parent was normal volunteer, attending the school and helping their child and other people up till the point when they found out he's a felon and cannot attend the activities. So what has changed? He was accepted till that point, and after that point he suddenly became a quote-unquote a bad guy. And to me, that's why it needs a second set of eyes, need to be revisited to see are we following the norms of the other school divisions. And I think last time Dr. Coleman had certain other districts which are in our neighborhood, Charlottesville, Hampton Roads, in his words, are allowing returning citizens a second chance to look at it.
Dr. Brennan?
I'm
I'm also in favor of a change in the policy and agree with Dr. Gupta and Ms. Evans that it should be on a case-by-case basis, and that's based on my participation in the Equity Task Force in the past and my role on the board currently.
Mr. Harvey?
I support what other board members have also said. I'm also in favor for option 2, and I encourage the further development of the protocols for adoption.
Ms. Carter?
I'm a strong believer in second chances, and as a mental health supervisor for years, I've worked with individuals that had a mental health background or history of mental health and had done various things that prohibited them from taking part or becoming employed. And I would always call the HR people, and they would give me the same response, that they couldn't volunteer, they couldn't work in their setting. I used to think that was horrible until I came on this side. And I think your roles and your perspectives change. And me believing in second chances, I still do, but as a sitting in this position, I have to go with number 1. And primarily because we're here to make sure that the policies and that the safety of children and also that is number 1. And also I look at the legal advice we've received that we pay a fortune for tells us that you're introducing a risk and that this is a foreseeable risk. And I do not want to take that risk. I do want to be first in a lot of things, but this is not where I think the advocacy needs to start, not at the school board. And as far as I know, I'm not aware of any other schools that have really entertained this or started this policy. So for that, I said I'm in favor of number 1. And also, if it's the target population, if it's tier 3 children that really have more mental health needs, and I think they need mental health trained people that have the skill set to help them in that area. And we do not know all the unintended consequences. So if we go and there's teachers that have been let go, now they can return and be a volunteer. And who's going to vet them? Who vets people? Or we have to pay for extra people that take care of this issue or that have the authority to say yes? Or is there going to be an assessment tool that's used to see who is ready or who is eligible at this time to volunteer? But I'm keeping with number 1 at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Sinha?
I'm somewhere between where Ms. Carter is and the other group, not opening up totally with the exception of barrier crimes and violent crimes, but somewhere in the middle. Certainly if somebody's rights have been completely restored, they can vote, they can do everything, that would be good. But I would like to see a little bit more structure and guidelines in terms of where it's appropriate to have them as volunteers. Ms. Carter just raised an interesting case. And I think we need to think about the criteria or how these people are vetted. I'm not clear on how that would go. We need to come up with a rational, usable system so it doesn't seem arbitrary or have bias. I can sympathize with people. I'm privileged to have grown up in white neighborhoods, and I think some of the things I did in my youth, if I had lived in a different neighborhood, I might, have been caught. Who knows what would have happened. I've outgrown those things, as many felons likely have. So I do see the problem in how it disproportionately affects people of color. But we can't solve the criminal justice system here. So I would like to provide an avenue for convicted felons to be volunteers, but with, especially initially going into it, for the short term, have some kind of structure or caveats or limitations to who would be permitted.
So, yes.
Yes, yeah.
Dr. Coleman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that this is an equity issue. One great person recently stated, equity ensures that every child has exactly what they need, exactly when they need it to be successful. And so I am supporting a modification or change in the existing policy.
Dr. Nellis?
I would like to stay with the first option, keep the policy as it is. Looking at the code and the requirements that are for hiring teachers, which are basically no felonies or other convictions. We can't directly hire someone that has some kind of conviction. And the volunteers, for me, this is just indirectly doing the same thing. I'm not sure why we would have different criteria. Very sympathetic to the stories and situations of people. To me, that strikes me that this is really a matter for the legislation to address. It's not when school boards take this on for good reason. I think you're increasing, in the event something happens, your liability is going to be more. Your liability is going to be higher, and it doesn't take much to get sued these days. And I think members of the board, might be able to appreciate that. And so that's where I would like to stay with the policy as it is.
I would also agree to stay with policy 1. My reason for that is because students are required to be in school. There are many opportunities for people to volunteer in places where parents make the choice to put their children in those programs. In a school, they don't. I'm also worried about the extra responsibility on principals and teachers. We do not have a strong volunteer training. We have heard individuals speak that if a child's having difficulty, the volunteer can walk them around the building, and we don't allow those kinds of things. We've also not heard back from parents and employees, and I feel very strongly about that. We had a poll the last time. The results were skewed. It was not a good poll, and I think that that's an important piece of this. I'm not unwilling to embrace change. I just want it to be done the right way. So there are 6 for the change, and there are 3 against the change. The majority of the board has spoken that to move forward with change. But that does not, we still have to look at the policy. All right. All right, this is a board policy that will be discussed and decided by the entire board. This will not go back to a committee. That is because this is one that the entire board needs to work on and to be included in that discussion. I'm going to let Dr. Edwards, do you have anything to add to this?
No, just that I look forward to working with the board on the changes and modifications, and I think given what you've said and given the 6-3, the clarity behind the process is going to be really important in terms of how we do it. I would also say that with anything new that we try, that we be in more like a pilot mode and reflective and collect data as to how it's going and how it's working in terms of both implementation and the operation of new policy.
Okay. Dr. Sinai?
I would just like to add that you did raise an important point, and something I was about to ask until you said it is, what do we know about how the building principals and teachers feel about this policy, because they are going to be right there monitoring? Is it so? I'm looking forward to getting that feedback and also gauging public opinion too.
Once the board has made a decision, it's our responsibility as our governance and norms that we support that decision. And so therefore it now becomes the action of the board, and so that we need to move forward. At this point, I would like to clarify that our insurance concern has been addressed. 100%.
As 100% as possible, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's very important. All right, the floor is now open for Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for all of the very important opinions that have been given. They are all valuable and will be essential to us doing what we need to do. I do appreciate the litigious nature of this matter, as was stated, but we've been fighting in Virginia for local control, and so we don't necessarily want the legislature to tell us what to do here at the local level, but we've got to do it right. And some of you may be aware that we've been working on this for quite a while. And I remember way back when Bob Brennan and I were on the Equity Task Force. And now we've developed and moved along. And so it's been a lot of work. And so, Madam Chair, I know everyone has something to say, and we'll yield. But we have given some thoughts reflective of the history and kind of where we are on this, and would like to put those thoughts on the table along with all of the thoughts of everyone, and you can tell us when that would be appropriate to do. And I would yield to my colleague Bob Brennan whenever that is appropriate.
Well, that's what we're doing now. We're going to have discussion about the what we as a board would like to have this policy look like. Dr. Nilles?
Do we have any kind of notional plan or schedule for coming up with an updated or modified
Well, we first have
policy?
That's what we're going to talk about
Okay.
now. And then we'll have to put it in a formal presentation as a board agenda item. But we want to do that as a board. So I think, Bob, this would be the opportunity.
So, as we all know, there's been a lot of discussion about this over a long time. And my understanding is that on a logistical point of view, it has gone to the committee, the board committee, to review it, and they have asked that the board come up with specific recommendations related to the policy and regulations so that we are designing and talking about this. And my impression was that we were actually going to have some of those discussions tonight, so I'd like to, kind of
That's what we're doing now.
Right, so I'd like to kind of pursue that. As James has commented, that he and I have been involved in this for a long time, from going back to the Equity Task Force, and really would like to see this change made if the board agrees to it. Over the last month or two, in anticipation of this meeting, we have talked with, obviously reviewed the Equity Task Force recommendation, which was a great presentation and well put together. We have talked with administration. We have reviewed other districts that have similar policies or have policies about that. James has also talked to some of them, and also VSBA. I'll let him comment on that. So what we'd like to do, if it's okay with the board, is to put out some general ideas about how we could perhaps structure this strictly for discussion, not for regulation, but just to get the conversation going. So that's
At the board level?
at the board level, because I think it's the board that's going to have to do this. We can't bounce it back to someone else. So it's an area to start, not thinking that we're going to come up with regulations this evening, but if we can come up with some consensus of what we want to do. So I would hope we were going to be able to do a little PowerPoint, but we can't do that. But I have made some copies of some slides. If I could pass those out. And in the meantime, James, do you want to comment on your conversation or impressions from other school districts and the SBA about this?
Yeah, I'd be glad to do so. I wanted to be clear that I have not the authority to speak on behalf of anyone. So for the purposes of the media and all of the solid voices around this table, I have made that statement up front. And because of the nature of this matter, I have to say it that way. Let me just begin by stating that we talk about equity, but a lot of times policies across the Commonwealth do not reflect an investment in equity. And in my personal opinion, from many of the colleagues that I have talked to, they appreciate the courage to tackle this equity matter and to do it in a way that would reduce risk at the same time. Interestingly, places like Henrico County, if you look on their particular page, similarly Chesterfield County, their policies are open to a vetting process, similar to what a modification may look like for us. You have some school divisions like Norfolk that specifically state no felons. I've talked to some who are moving right on up the national chain in terms of being recognized for all these great awards. And they're discussing the fact that in some localities, in every locality for that matter, you may have kids that you already know that it's a huge chance they're going to fall through the cracks. And you don't want to see them on the front page of the paper or incarcerated. And so they're looking now at developing some language that would be in harmony with the state legislature saying that employees cannot, but leaving it open for volunteers to participate. So to that end, I'm hearing and can actually show the pieces that leave it open for the particular school division to determine whether or not someone with a felony can participate, as well as many around the state that are saying that we need to have the courage to match our equity talk and equity habits with policies and regulations that reflect that.
Thank you, James.
Can we have a moment to look at this before we start talking about it?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think we're trying to listen and look, and if you have suggestions, other suggestions.
Look through it. My question was, if all this application review has happened and I ended up in trouble again, a new felony, will there be a process, sort of a looping in to make sure it's an annual review, not one-time review? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
If I end up in trouble, which
Right, I think we have a comment about that also, that if someone is clear as a volunteer who has a history of a felony and commits a felony, that excludes them being a volunteer, and if they're charged with that.
No. What I'm saying is, am I approved to be a volunteer now, but the felony was not meeting the benchmarks of being a sexual offender or a violent criminal. I'm visiting my kid, but then I get in trouble again with the law. And so, is there an annual review process of that? So to make sure your record is clean from there on.
Sure.
Which I didn't see here.
Well, I think there's an end review of all volunteers.
It's
You
all
have to
volunteers.
reapply. You have to,
There's a reapplication every August.
yes.
For all volunteers.
Yes, sir.
Oh, so then they take.
There's also a part of self-reporting that's part of it as well.
If it's okay with the board, I would like to walk through it. I think it'd be helpful, and I think it's pretty.
But remember, this
straightforward.
is just one suggestion, and if
Right.
other people have suggestions or comments, this is not our policy. This is just a proposal that a couple of
Right.
board members have worked on.
They have worked hard in developing. I think it has been, just reading it, I can see a lot of work has gone in thinking.
Thank you,
through
Dr. Gupta. We appreciate that.
the process.
You're exactly right. So I think there are three issues that we want to talk about, and I'm sorry, I'll try to refer to these points so that the people who are here can hear it, but I think there are three things we like to talk about. One is what the protocol is, which is who is the entity that would review the applications. That's number one. Number two is, what are the parameters for review of volunteer applications by individuals with a felony? What guidelines would you use to decide whether someone's allowed to volunteer or not? And then lastly, on an annual basis, what data should be looked at and reported to the board to understand whether we think this process is going properly and whether it's being doing what we want it to do, and that's all appropriate. So three areas: protocol, parameters, and then what data. So regarding the protocol, and again, this was discussed with LCS administration, so there's this proposal has been discussed informally at that level. What has been suggested is that the application process will be done by a panel of Lynchburg City School administrators who review the applications. And that panel will consist of 6 people: the superintendent, would be on the panel. There'd be a representative from the Engagement, Equity, and Opportunity Division. There'd be 2 representatives from Lynchburg City Schools Administration, and there'd be 2 representatives of the school to which individuals requesting volunteer privileges. So a panel of 6 people, superintendent, representative of the Engagement Opportunity, 2 representative of LCS administration, and 2 representative of the school to which the individual representing volunteer privileges. Yes, Dr. Gupta.
Or designee or just superintendent? You want superintendent
Yes.
or designee? So the deputy superintendent or?
Again, as Ms. Morrison pointed out, this is all for discussion, so whatever the board agrees upon, but that's the proposal, but we can certainly modify it and see what the administration thinks. On page 2, under the protocol, as far as the review, is the understanding, which is in our policy, that all volunteers serve at the discretion of the superintendent. Therefore, the final decision on the application is made by the superintendent. So theoretically, it's not a vote of those 6 people. It's a review of the application, discussion of the application. The superintendent makes that decision, and that's the final decision by the policy that we currently have, inherent in the fact that the superintendent, we're obviously making an exclusion to the policy, and the superintendent makes that decision.
Just a question.
Yeah.
When it says that all volunteers serve at the discretion, what does that mean?
Yes, that's a good question. That's my question too.
That's what's in our current
I know.
policy. Yeah. I have no clear answer for what that means, except for the fact that they're working in the school system with our kids, volunteering, similar to our employees who are working, so everybody's under my discretion.
The superintendent can fire the volunteer, period, I mean, for whatever reason.
Dr. Millis, that would be my understanding.
Okay.
And going to page 1, I didn't know we were going to ask questions.
No, we do.
Okay, so what are the skill sets of these individuals? We're just going to pick 2 volunteers from representatives of LCA administration. Are they going to be in HR or in 2 representatives from the school? Are they going to be like, who are these?
Those are details that we'd have to look at. And I think we,
And to my understanding, this is case by case, and we do want consistency, and all of that would have to be determined. But sometimes you may have an applicant with certain dynamics that may require the composition of certain people versus others, but they would all be trained who would be a part of the team. And so it's all case by case.
Who currently does this now? What are the,
We don't accept felons
I mean, who currently looks at the volunteer applications that come in?
in my office between Ben and I.
we get a report that is a felon, but they don't list what the felon was. We do?
We can see what they're.
You can't see what's on the background. Okay.
And I review those before I sign the letter that goes out to the individual.
Okay.
So now you have 6 additional people. Well, 5 additional people
Well, right now, it's
who are
just
privy to
if
this
you-
information.
If you have something on there that's a no, there's really no discussion.
review.
So,
And the matter of confidentiality is important.
yes.
As I look through this, 2 representatives of the school to which individual is requesting volunteer privileges. Are those representative staff? Are they volunteer? Are they the principal? Are they? So I think, I agree with Ms. Carter. I think we've got to give, some parameters to these words that we use.
And this is the time to do that. So you think it should be the principal? The idea was it would be representatives, from that school. So I think this is what we need to fill in.
I
the
think
blank.
one of those representatives must be the principal.
Okay.
Because I think the
Principal's on
principal is
site.
responsible for his or her building.
Yeah.
And I think that, one of them must be the principal.
Mm-hmm.
I also have written down, this policy became a hot button issue right as it's been a hot button issue for a long time, but it was very active as I came on board. So as I've gone to schools, I've talked with parents and teachers and so forth and just gotten their opinions on this. So one option that I would just throw out there for consideration is if there will be a member a representative from maybe a PTO or something like that, so that the parents have representatives as this as well. That could be a loaded issue.
It'd
But
probably be
it-
an issue of confidentiality.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm worried about confidentiality
And
too.
you have 5 or 6 people already looking at what you.
But also remember that some people may not appeal. This is if there is an appeal.
No, this is just the application.
What if I
We
don't
have
wanna-
these many eyes on the.
It's about, what did we have, 32 last year, is that 36?
I didn't bring the number.
So,
There-
we
it
know
was
it's in the
30
30s.
something.
Yeah, okay.
Then the representative from Engagement, Equity, and Opportunity. Is this going to be the director of Engagement, Equity, or any member on the Equity Task Force, or?
I think we use that same tool Dr. Gupta used, or designee.
The same thing will apply for representatives from LCS administration. Who'll pick them up? Will the superintendent picks them up, or they're handpicked by the committee? So those. Are we looking at division, equity, and inclusion, or the inclusion, equity, and inclusion task force?
The division of equity in the school, Lynchburg's administration,
So here in the central.
engagement, equity, and opportunity division.
I don't think any of it can be parents. I don't think any of it can be parents.
I was just throwing that out there because that was.
Yeah.
Sure.
I just think for confidential, yeah, with other parents, I don't think you can put parents on that.
I mean, the person, we could involve parents if the person applying understands that their information, which is very sensitive, will be shared with this committee. But I agree. I would like to give parents a voice, but I think we have to do that at the outset in driving this policy. But for purposes of review, I think it has to be employees up and down of our division that would have to adhere to strict confidentiality rules for the sake of the applicant.
Out of curiosity, why did you pick number two representatives and 2 representatives?
Sorry. Do one more time, Dr. Gupta.
Like bullet number point 3 and 4, you got 2 representatives and 2 representatives. So because we have superintendent, 1 single representative, so you need a representation from, as you said, there are too many people, a lot of productivity loss if you have.
That's up to this.
So could we have just one individual so
one.
they have their voice? Maybe the principal, as Mr. Harvey suggested, from the school. And superintendent represents LCS administration, right? So who else you had in mind to include from LCS administration?
So I think that's up for discussion. I think it's a good point as far as how many people should be on the committee. I think the concept is the idea that there should be a panel. The superintendent should be on each one because it's their decision or their designee and these different areas. But I think the number, who they are, can be filled in as this gets hammered out, based on what we all think. So that's again, the reason for discussion, and I'm not sure how we came up with that number, to be honest with you.
Would it be prudent for us to consider a legal representative on this committee as well?
If we get a legal opinion about it.
Well, that's what I was kind of, because I could see a review coming through and there are questions being asked about what charges might have been against the individual,
Well,
and someone to be able to explain that to the review committee.
Dr. Coleman?
I don't want to get ahead of Bob, but I know that there would be a 60-day period, if I believe, am I correct? So you could consult with different folk. Certainly, it's already been stated, we don't want to tie up people's time where we don't necessarily have to at that moment. And then I also would make it clear, again, I don't want to get ahead, but under the protocol where it's going to talk about panel decisions will apply to the schools to which the application was submitted. So you may have a parent or a community member who has a kid in elementary, middle, and high school all at the same time. So again, it's always trying to pull together a team or a panel that would have the skills and the training and the ability to really help the superintendent make that hard decision on whether or not that person would be able to share.
Do we have any sense of how many of these applications we'll be reviewing every year? I'm just concerned about the burden on people and
It was in the 30s last year.
total volunteers or volunteers who were
Total
pinged for felonies.
felons.
This process is for review of,
Just
Those who get
yeah.
flagged, right?
Yes.
And this year there were 32.
32, 30s, in the 30s, mid-30s.
Out of how many volunteer applications? I don't know.
Running quick.
Hundreds.
I'm sorry, is it like in the hundreds or?
More.
It's easily 1,200 to 1,500.
Okay. Thank
I really
you.
think that the two representatives of the LCA administration, one needs to be an HR person, because we're talking about an application.
Okay, let's continue on. Dr. Brennan?
Do you have any comments as far as what's been discussed so far? Any input for us? You're nice to be here tonight. We recognize you for your help.
And I will say, speak to Mr. Harvey, if there's anything legal as far as the offense, that is something that can be found in the code. Any adult offenses in the state of Virginia is public information. So while the board may not want that person, it to be known that they have applied as a volunteer, any information about sentencing, how much time they got for that crime is something that is accessible, that if whatever policy is developed or created that that can be, and I don't know about the system that the school currently looks at, it says the felony, I don't know if it tells how much time or anything that came with the felony, if it just says this person had this type of felony and what it was. But if not, there are other ways to get that information if it's concerned about if they're under any other parole requirements, fine payment requirements. I think right now, if someone has any other questions, as far as the general, I think that you all are still, sounds like very much in beginning stages of figuring out where you want to go. So if I feel that something from a legal standpoint needs some input, I'll be glad to speak at this meeting, or if something comes to me later, I will send you all out some information or email.
Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Harvey?
I think my clarification was when this panel is in the process of review, to have someone with some legal expertise there to help answer questions that the reviewers might have regarding what the conviction could have meant, what parole.
And that could be with a telephone call, or just, that doesn't necessarily have to be that person on the committee, but there, we could follow up with a telephone call.
Some information that prior to the meeting
Would be helpful.
gathered and given to the panel that will handle this.
I think it would be difficult to tie down saying somebody from legal has to be at every review panel. If we can get the info, I'd see the need for it, but if we can get it there, then we don't have to have somebody present.
I do understand about the questions. Okay.
So the other points I'm sure you all have read, but number 2 is all decision by the superintendent would be final without options for appeal, so it would not come to another entity, so it's just come back to the board. Panel decision will apply to the school to which the applicant was submitted, as well as other schools in the Lynchburg public school system. We want it to be a universal phenomenon, that you can't be accepted or rejected at one school, apply to another school, and have a different opinion. We want it to be the same across the school system. All applicants will be reviewed, and the applicant will be contacted within 60 days. Yeah, sure.
Say that again, what you just said before.
So we'd like to have it so that it's uniform across Lynchburg City schools. So if someone had a child in an elementary school and who had a history of a felony and applied and was rejected, for example, their application went before the panel was rejected, if they then went to the high school where have another child, they shouldn't be accepted there. It should be a uniform decision, which is one of the reasons we want to have some of the consistency on the panel, so that someone to say, well, why was I accepted at this school, but I was rejected at that school? We like it to be uniform and same across the school system.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from Ms. Harvey? Yeah.
Just help me understand, when people volunteer, do they typically volunteer to be at a particular school, or do they volunteer? I guess it depends, right? That's the answer.
Yeah.
Any and everything in between. It could be the schools that their children just attend. It could be across the whole division because they're a retired teacher and they want to read to kids at every building. It could be college students that come down as part of a service project and they will apply across the whole division. So,
And you have to check which schools that you're in.
yes.
Interested in working in? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Harvey?
I just wanted to go back and revisit all decisions by the superintendent will be final without without the option of appeal. Is that something that we as a body would have? No offense, but we have other decisions that are made that the school board has representatives that then review and appeal for.
But all volunteers serve at the discretion of the superintendent.
I agree with that, but I'm questioning this. All decisions made by the superintendent will be final without an option of parole, of appeal. So
I'm going to say I just agree with that. If we're doing a panel,
You agree or disagree?
I agree that it should be her final decision and there is no appeal. I think if we have the panel in place, that's what they're there for. And I think we go with her decision.
Dr. Nellis?
Yeah, if the superintendent, if the volunteer serves at the discretion of the superintendent, it's the superintendent's decision whether they start. So.
But I think I initially had the same reaction. Any other?
So, let's just play this out. So if everyone on this panel, the 5 say no, and the superintendent says yes.
It's her decision according to this.
Okay.
That's what's in our policy now as well, too.
but the way this is also written, she could simply say yes, and you wouldn't need the policy. You wouldn't need the review, right? Because it says all volunteers serve at the discretion of the superintendent. Therefore, the final decision on the application is made by the superintendent.
Well, but I think the discussion and the input and certainly would be her consideration of the superintendent's consideration of that input and to have a different point of view. I may think of something that she or the superintendent would say, thank you, but I think that two-way conversation is what I'm reading in this. Dr.
I
Gupta?
see the role of panel as advisory to the superintendent. Right. And the superintendent makes the final decision.
Okay. So you think that was hard. Now we're going to point 2, which is parameters for evaluating volunteer application with felony convictions. So just to say in general, there's multiple ways to look at this. You can look at it in a very fine, detailed area. How many years has it been since the person finished it? What type of they barrier crimes or not? Looking into all of that, there's not a lot of information to give you an idea of time. And looking at barrier crimes, which I remember when those were presented at Dr. Braban, were what he termed crimes that were pretty hideous. Murder, things that were people would say you can't do that. The state of Virginia actually has about 3 pages of these crimes, and some of the things in there like carjacking, there are other things that are not, that you would say, I'm not sure I would put that under a hideous idea. So this is taking another view, and I think this is what the board needs to digest is, do we want an overview or do we want specific detail? So this is an overview, and as part of the discussion should be said, do we want more detail? So as an overview, number 1 in bold is any convictions involving a crime against a minor or related to child abuse will exclude an individual from volunteering in Lynchburg City Schools. That is true for this policy. That's true for every school district we talk to. They all say the same thing. Period. That's the end of the story. So that's come up multiple times. We want to be very reassuring that, that is the policy. Yeah.
That's in the state code. That's not
Right.
really a policy option
Perfect.
for us to consider.
Right, okay. So, accepting that's not going to, that we all agree on that. So exceptions to volunteer policy regarding felony convictions not related to crimes against minors or child abuse will include the following parameters. Number 1, severity of the crime and the circumstances surrounding the underlying act. Number 2, whether the crime was a violent crime or involved a weapon. Number 3, whether the crime was a crime against property or a crime against a person. Number 4, if a drug conviction, the nature of the controlled substances and whether the conviction was for use or for distribution. Those are, let's see here. And then, I'm sorry, and this is part 2. The number of felony convictions and length of time between the time served for the crime and the submission of the volunteer application. Whether the individual is under legal restriction or probation related to the conviction at the time the exception is sought. Whether the individual seeking the exception has demonstrated successful integration in the community such that the individual will be a positive role model for children. And then finally, the reason that the individual wants to serve as a volunteer. So those are general parameters for the panel to use as guidelines, and they would address those as they feel appropriate.
If I can add one thing so that you understand what we get on the level of the report, we know nothing of any circumstances related to the crime. We get a felony, the description of what it is. We can see the sentencing like was referred to and any fines and penalties. We don't know the state of any of those things, but circumstances is way beyond anything we ever see.
Right. So we would need to, if we pursued the policy, we'd have to be able to have that information as part of the application
I
and the
would
process.
question how you would get that information.
Well, and how would it be judged?
Judged.
I mean, by the panel. I mean, circumstances is kind of hard because it's everybody looks at things differently.
You're talking about the number of times between, it's under legal restriction or probation related conviction, at the time, well, something else I was looking at. The length of time between the time served for the crime and the submission of the volunteer application. But as Dr. Copeland said, how we will obtain that information, it will have to be voluntary.
That one we should.
Well, that one, but what the information or the event or the crime was would have to be told to us.
I would be of the opinion that information is attainable. Now, exactly how it is, I don't know. I'm looking at Henrico's website, and it says anyone convicted of a misdemeanor or felony offense, especially an offense against a minor, may be disqualified from volunteering depending on the nature of the offense and the nature of a school volunteer activity. So again, looking at all of that, these are just some parameters that we would be taking a deeper dive and trying to get as much information we could in terms of making the decision in the vetting process for that individual.
Okay, I was looking at this. Whether the individual is under legal restriction or on, so that means is the person still on probation during this time? Okay. So we're looking at that as an exception.
Right, we're looking at that as a parameter they would consider.
This could potentially help us in this decision, but I thought we were looking at which time that person's legal rights were restored. So at that point, I would think that you would not, and this would be a question that legal could probably address, but I would suspect that before your legal rights are fully restored, you would no longer be on probation. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on what exactly, I guess, what you mean by the legal restriction, because you can be on probation and still have certain things like fines or other requirements that have to be fulfilled. So it all really depends on what that person is ordered to do.
Okay, I guess I was under the impression that we were talking about individuals whose rights had been restored.
What does that
So
mean?
that's what I'm asking that question.
My understanding is that's a very hard hurdle in the state of Virginia. So individuals who have a felony conviction cannot get their rights restored. It's difficult for that to happen. So we're talking people who have served their time, done whatever they had to do for their penalty, for their crime. They've served it, they've done it, but I think, Attorney Hope with that.
Speaks to expungement.
Yeah.
You cannot, if you've been convicted, that whatever underlying thing you were charged with cannot be expunged.
Okay.
So, and then for restoration of rights, the only way I'm really familiar with that term is such as voting rights.
Right.
And what you have to do to, and that requires payment of fines. I think it's a certain number of years, perhaps from the incident, and all your responsibilities under your court order have been fulfilled. And I'm not sure about the exact number of time under the restoration of felon rights from voting, how long that is, but for restoration of rights of voting and then expungement, two different processes.
Very good, because all of these are thoughts for parameters, but just, again, keep in mind, depending on who's governor, all of those types of dynamics, which takes it out of our hand and makes it somewhat unfair for people, depending on who's sitting in the governor's mansion.
Jerry, just one other clarification is when this was discussed before about a time period, the discussion came up, was it when the conviction occurred or was it when the person had completed their penalty? That was the time that we were talking about, not restoration of rights or expungement of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going based off of what we've had presenters come in and share with us that their rights have been restored and so forth.
Right.
And that's why I'm asking this question, because for me, I don't think that timeline should be from the time of the conviction. I think it should be from the time of when they have met the requirements of their final legal status.
So I think part of that is that everyone would agree that someone who had a felony who has had their rights restored, certainly they're able to vote. They should
Right.
be able to volunteer in the school system, and under the system we're not able to. Again, my understanding is the number of people who actually get their rights restored who have a history of felony in the state of Virginia is a very small number of people who have a history of felony, because it's so difficult for that to happen. So that's going to be a pretty big barrier. So that's not been one of the discussions, but people have said that.
Yeah.
I've had my rights restored. I should be able to volunteer schools, and I think we'd all agree with that.
And I would think if something was expunged, then it wouldn't ping on the record, right? Or would it?
Yeah.
It does? No.
It should not.
It shouldn't, because it's expunged.
It's still because of a public record in the past, it still could come up maybe inadvertently in something, then that person would have to show, no, I've had this expunged. But charges are also public information, so that's out there.
I didn't think we were considering individuals that were still on probation, though there were some, there had to be a period of time. I really would look at the bullet point 2.
I think that's one of the points for our discussion tonight, is that we feel like that should be in there, we can
This one
consider
under
that.
protocol
Whether
2.
the individual is under legal restriction or probation related to conviction at the time the exception is sought. This one.
Coach, I need to get my glasses.
You need glasses.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I see it. One-
Dr. Coleman?
Once again, the weight on the sitting superintendent, whoever that may be, and if it's D2 or whatever you want to refer to this committee. Well, that's how you have to talk when you're talking policies and things of that nature. So my point is that that's why we want to put this skilled group together, because it may be someone who may be with a probation or something that after the proper vetting process and the needs of a kid and where that person is, that they may feel that that person could be ready. And so I personally am okay with that group making that determination rather than us necessarily creating a barrier for the person.
Dr. Zahn?
Would we consider, because I assume they'd be through probation too, but not understanding exactly how probation works and how long it can last, which for some people I'm pretty sure it probably lasts a really long time. Would we require, assuming we don't flat out prohibit people who are on probation, some kind of letter from their probation officer or some other kind of thing as a in support of their application?
Like a recommendation?
Yeah.
I mean, on probation, sometimes employers do ask for information and where they are in their status. I think it'd probably be up to the probation office if that's something that they would like to provide this office, that something they wouldn't be required to do.
I would certainly feel more comfortable if we did that.
I'm sorry, Batul. Just yell out my name.
No. Two things I wanted to say is, I know we want it to be perfect and we'll get there, but as superintendent says, we are in pilot mode and it'll require reflection after some time. So any policy we put in place may require change going forward. And having said that, have you guys looked at what other schools have in place where they allow felon volunteers to work in terms of policies?
Do you want to comment on that, James?
As I tried to, probably poorly, no one really wants to reveal the specificities of that process. And so, but they do what they do as they do what they do. And I suspect we will be doing likewise.
Even with your
I don't know if I said
VSBA
that right or
contract.
not, but I said the best I do have.
There are some school systems who absolutely say no.
Right.
Because we've gotten that feedback too. They just say no.
But there is
Yes,
a,
they
but there is a move of front that is appreciating the courage to tackle this particular issue, and language is currently being developed in several of the very aggressive school divisions towards this. And so we will not be alone. I can guarantee you that. We will not be alone.
And another way to look at my comment is that so there are other school districts that do it by case basis, and they do not have the detail that we're trying to hammer out. They say it's up to the superintendent,
That's
it's
right.
a case-by-case basis, and they do decide. So we are, I think, trying to go beyond that to actually have some
Such as
parameters
the
in place.
language in Charlottesville, not Charlottesville, Chesterfield, and I have that here. So it would, yes, ma'am.
Pretty detailed.
Okay.
Yep. Any other comments on parameters?
Did we even float a window of time? I mean, are we talking weeks, months, years?
I said 60 days.
You mean for this to be done?
No.
For the time, the duration between the end of the requirement for the felony and when they can
Right.
be seen. So this goes back to the 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
And I would say, I think, I would think that 15 years is going to be prohibitive, period. Because, if someone makes a mistake, odds are they're in their late teens, early 20s. They're waiting 15 years, their kids could potentially be
Right.
through the program. So,
James?
Very briefly, putting it then in context to where we are now, one of the good pieces of having a strong, capable superintendent is that rather than having to say 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, let's let this panel that the superintendent actually have to make the decision, deal with those matters on a case-by-case situation, since we may have individuals that may be a good fit immediately. And so I'm just not prepared to put any type of time on that and leave that to the discretion of the panel.
Will the panel be interviewing the applicant, or they just, right now, do we interview them, or they just apply and we reject them on a piece of paper?
I think that, I'm sorry.
That's a question I think
Yeah.
that we would have to answer.
So we're not looking at kids and trying to match them to different, just people that volunteer. Okay.
Applicants.
Right, okay.
Ms.
Like to
Evans?
say,
Are we purposely matching kids to
Wait a
certain?
minute,
No.
wait,
Yes, ma'am.
Val?
James, I agree on the time piece. I think that's a panel decision as well.
Dr. Coleman?
This isn't being pulled out the sky somewhere
Yeah.
just to do this and to have courage. There are kids, again, according to equity, that specifically may need to be matched with an individual. So no, not in all cases. But in some cases, I want to leave that up to the discretion of the panel to make those determinations, because at the end of the day, we're doing this so we can help kids.
Mr. Harvey, sorry.
I hear this, but I also think, we have to give, I don't want to say cover, but we have to make sure that we're not putting the superintendent in a difficult spot either, with not having a time frame there. I feel like that having a time shows that the individual does not repeat certain bad choices. And that's why I feel like that a time period is going to be critical. Because if not, it could conceivably happen that, let's say we have a person that presents very well before this committee. And this committee then says, okay, you're approved, superintendent agrees, and a week later does the exact same thing that they just did a week before, because we did not have any window of time.
Dr. Gupta?
We need to look at in the context of most of these people who will be coming in front are because of some socio-economic issues. They got entrapped into being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but then they value education because they're sending their kids to the school system. So there is some value attached in their mindset. So it's not like somebody off the street will be just walking up to be volunteer. They have their wards or their kids in the school system. They value the education. They want them to make their lives better. And it provides a little bit more push for those kids to do better in their
But
lives.
you don't have to have, you can volunteer in the schools without having children in it. So,
I think he was just saying
majority.
cases
Majority
that are
of
going to
the
go to all this work are because they have a child
A
they're
vested
trying
interest.
to help. Yes, an invested interest in the
Yes.
schools and their child.
We really start tackling serious mentoring programs, et cetera. This could well be something that's very, very valuable. Now, I hear the very well stated piece, Gary. That's very true, and I think I mentioned the last time with an incident in Martinsville, where in a case by case, they allowed someone and then they repeated a violation, and then I think this deals with that. So you could have that really under any case where that could happen, where persons could go out. I mean, they could be out for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years and do something. Because unfortunately, we're just not perfect. I tried to be Madam Chair, but I just not.
Close. What about the parent who says, I do not want my child working with a volunteer?
How do we get that message out to everyone about the opt-out?
And I'm not just saying, I'm saying any volunteer.
But I think that, I don't think that you're forced to work with a volunteer in the schools. I've never seen a teacher force somebody to work with a volunteer. I mean, like, I think if it's something a parent is concerned about, they can address it with the principal. And I can't imagine that a teacher would say, you have to work with this volunteer, you have no choice.
But that would have to be part of a discussion, that parents know that they can do that. Dr. Gupta?
Here is a valid point, because there may be some concern of the parents of other kids in the class, the fear of unknown. So an option or conversation with them to make sure that they are at ease.
Tim?
Somebody with felony working in the classroom with their
The
kid.
note I had written, what
Thank you.
obligation do we have to disclose that a volunteer at their school has been vetted through our,
We wouldn't.
we don't have an obligation to disclose that? So, and then I'm concerned, like you could say a student could opt out, but what if it's a field trip? You wouldn't want them to opt out of go into that or something.
I just have rarely in the classroom seen where there's only one volunteer. I mean, there are usually many in a classroom, especially if you're going on a trip. And I think you're right. I think it's got to be communication at the beginning of the year. The Lynchburg City policy has changed. And they are allowing, they're going through this process. If it's something that you are not comfortable with, write me a letter and let me know.
Because like you said, but we can't say to parents, well, we have some volunteers that have this record and some volunteers that don't. That wouldn't be fair to the
It
volunteer.
would not be fair.
So that opt-out is not, you just have to opt out of
Correct.
working with any volunteer at that point, if you didn't know.
Any other discussion?
I just want to reiterate, I think what Dr. Gupta was saying before, because the other side is you may volunteer if you don't have a child, but also the population of people who are volunteering are people who are coming into schools to help the schools and help the children wherever stage. So again, we want to keep that in mind. They're not coming in to do some other job, they're coming in to volunteer in the school. So I think that's important for us to remember.
I think a critical piece to this will be education for all volunteers, all volunteers. And if you look at other school systems, they have a lot more training and parameters that people know.
And just to reiterate that, because Ms. Morrison has said this before, that really this would have to do with redoing the entire volunteer policy, which would also talk about orientation for volunteers, what are the guidelines for volunteers in general. I mean, really, that's what happened with the draft that was done following this discussion before. It wasn't just in the volunteer policy, but it had other issues too. So this would really be revising the whole volunteer policy, including making it better to have more information in it.
Any other discussion, comments?
Okay, then the last point is data to be reviewed by the LCS board. So we're assuming that the board would like to have a report of what the outcome of the panel is and how this has worked. So on some type of basis defined by the board, quarterly, twice a year, annually. They would have some updates, and we've suggested, and again, this is just for discussion, add, subtract as you see, but we think you'd like to know what the number of applicants reviewed and number of applicants declined. List of felony convictions reviewed by the panel divided by applications accepted and applications denied, so you can actually see what crime it was they had who were denied and who were accepted. Number of applications by school to which individuals applied for volunteer privileges, just to have that information about which schools are getting volunteer applications. The demographics of the individual requesting volunteer privileges, including age, gender, race, relationship to LCS, such as a student, volunteer activity requested, what they're asking to do. And then lastly, any situation whereby an applicant was approved by the panel and subsequently rescinded would be some of the points that we might want to know.
Dr. Gupta?
How do we capture the reflection piece where superintendent was asking, the experience of building principals, the teachers, the other students, is there a way to capture that and they presented
the benefit of the process.
the benefit or the negative. Look at both sides of the coin and presenting that information. So because people will be sharing that information with somebody, either the principal shares with the superintendent or the teacher shares with the principal. How do we capture that information? And
Well, one way you could do it is have a very generic rating system, how engaged was this person, that would apply to all volunteers, and whether or not they need additional training, are they suitable to this task. Just because you want to volunteer doesn't mean you're the right person for that particular task. You might be better suited to something else, but you could have a non-invasive form where the people, the teacher involved, whether it's a field trip or some kind of activity, where they can just rate on a Likert scale, and you do it for everybody. Because then that can give you a sense too of where your training program development needs to be tweaked a little bit here and there.
I think that's a good idea. How we do it, but I think it's a great idea. Dr. Coleman? Karen, I'll get to you next.
Dr. Copeland, you had mentioned about 1,200 applicants per year. Presently, what type of training do we do with any volunteer that gets to be able to? Does the building principal just work with them?
It's at the building level.
Okay.
So the volunteer has something that they want to do, and the building principal is in the best position to put them where they need to be. Some folks just want to help in the copy room or file things and do things like that. Some just want to help in the library, so they really take care of that connection.
Without it creating a staff overload, I certainly would strongly support training for volunteers, as has been stated, to the degree it would make sure that everything is on the same page with the total operation of the division.
Sharon?
I really want to look at consistency with training around just all of the volunteers, period. And really that we adhere to what the policy is already asking. If they're not supposed to walk around, then just to make sure everyone knows what a volunteer does. Regarding the data, what's the turnaround time from the time a person receives the application to time it's reviewed?
So we said 60 days was going to be the parameter that we wanted to have the panel would do from time of application to a decision.
Mr. Harvey?
One other thing that I think that we do need to consider here is the application process of the individual. As Dr. Copeland pointed out, we're going to get very limited information from the background check. So I think that the application that the individual submits should be very detailed, asking them to explain certain situations and what they're applying to do and their rationale. So a lot of that, I think that needs to be, we almost need to have a guide and have them have a document that tells them these are the things to be prepared for when you meet with this committee. These are the questions they're going to ask you, because if someone determines that this process might be too invasive for what they're comfortable with, then maybe they should not apply. So I do think that we need to look at not only the quality of the data that we get, to track the success of this program, but we also need to be aware of the quality of the application that the individual will be expected to fill out.
Yeah.
I would think you'd almost need a supplemental application. So
Yeah.
once they get flagged, then you can get into more specific questions about the situation.
But I think at the very beginning you offer them the opportunity to clarify that they are a felon. Personally, I would think if somebody submits an application and we have to wait till we get a flag, that they've had a felony, to me that kind of, okay, why weren't you up front with that in the very beginning?
I think that's what
Well,
Tim is saying, that if you check felony, then it says, if you don't, skip to line 13. If you have checked this, then you need to complete more
does the application ask
information.
that?
I think it does. Usually it asks for clarification.
No, it
Not
doesn't.
the volunteer application, the employment application.
Does.
It's a required question everybody must answer.
But we don't find out until the application.
We also need to strike the balance on a volunteer application being easy and quick for folks to fill out, because you see the numbers of those that are moving right through. If a person applies right now in the current system and it comes back clear, there's not a human being that touches it. It just goes right to you're an active volunteer at the school. It's only when there is a flag that comes up that myself and Ms. Saunders or the superintendent get involved with reviewing what the circumstances are.
I do like your idea, though, of it detailed, but I think it has to happen once it's flagged, just because of the way the system is. And you're right, when you do that volunteer application at a school, it's fast. It's not a detailed.
Right, but I would think that if someone has a convicted felony, they could flag and say, hey,
I want to go ahead and apply.
I want to go ahead and apply this route versus going through this other route, waiting to be
Well, I
flagged.
mean, I think we can give them that option, but I don't think just because they didn't do that, that the option should be taken away. They should still get the application.
But it would
I
slow
mean, but I
down.
think they can do it that way, and I think you're right that we need a detailed, from that point, a more
Right.
detailed application.
So that if somebody wants to apply, they could go that route. Okay. Ms. Carter, did you have something?
Well, it's just what Gary, Mr. Harvey was stating, that if you know that the application is going to be denied, then you should just let us know upfront so that you can just follow the other procedures
And get started.
yes. If not, then it's just going to waste more time.
Okay, so can we go back so that we're all on the same page? Do you have more to add, Bob?
Nope, I'm done.
All right, if the protocol for review of volunteer applications, on the second page of the packet, we had a question regarding superintendent or designee. Are there any questions about that? We had a
It should be the superintendent, not the designee.
okay.
For the panel, not the decision, just the panel.
Well, then,
Correct? Is that what we're talking about right here? Just
Yeah.
the panel. I'm okay with it, a designate for the panel.
if she's going to have to make the final decision, hopefully she would have sat on the panel to.
James?
Again, the wisdom to the frequency of the meetings, all of those details, I don't think that we are trying to take that dive into the weeds to determine that. But it would appear to me that all of that can be worked out so that it will be, less time intensive on people. But I would think that the superintendent would have to be a part of the panel versus relying on someone else.
But other people think that we should have the word designee in
Oh,
there.
I guess, ma'am, I have no
I'm-
problem. I
That's why
guess-
I'm going back
I
through
got you.
this,
I
because I
have no
want to make
problem.
sure that we've gotten the points
I have no
that
problem.
people raised. And so the same thing is true of representative engagement, equity, and opportunity division. We said and then instead of two representative LCS administration, one would be the school principal and the other would be left to the individual principal to pick someone, was what I heard.
Full bullet for the representative school
Yeah.
would be, one would be the principal.
Principal,
Yeah.
4, and 2 representative of the LCS administration. That was the one that I heard a recommendation that it be someone from HR. But you're right, this is weeds, but I'm just making sure that we're getting everybody's ideas out there for consideration.
And I am so proud of our board, so I support the will of the board, but I do want to go on record, if I'm by myself, that I think it should be the superintendent, period. That's just my little input. No.
Not
Not
designate.
designate. Yeah, that's right. But that's just my little thought. I mean, that's all.
Well, I'm with you on that one.
Bob?
Can we, one direction is, but I think what we're doing is we're making suggestions for somebody to consider that the board has suggested, and they'll come back with another draft that says, this is what people involved in the decision will do. Is that fair to say that we're not actually changing this? We're kind of saying these are the issues that were brought up by the board for an entity to review, and then these come back to the board is a policy and regulations that outline, and then that would be, is it designee or not? And that's the discussion with the administration and how often the panels would meet.
This policy has come to us.
To us. Well, this is not even a policy, this is a recommendation, but so
Right,
we
so-
as a board might.
We have to.
It's not going to somebody else.
No, the school is here.
This is brainstorming some ideas and tossing around, and I need to sit back and think about this. I've been down this road before. It gets really complicated, and I'm going to be blunt right now. What I see is we're basically dumping this off on administration. I don't think that was the intent, but you know, when we say everything's in front of this panel and they make the decision, and superintendent's going to make the final decision regardless of whether she's on the review panel or not, because all volunteers
That's the
serve
policy.
at her discretion. So those are just some comments. I don't have anything really to add, but
To take a step back, take some time to digest through it, do our own individual research, what is out there.
Right, but I just want to make sure that we are covering the points that so that where there's a record of what. We're not making any decisions, but I'm just kind of trying to summarize and to look at where we are with it, which I think is my responsibility. So if we could just keep going with it. Sure. There was a question about how many should be on the panel, because 6 seems like a lot. Protocol for review of volunteer applications, want to make sure whatever we decide is universal and uniform, consistent. The parameters, there was a question about whether or not we should have a number of years, as to a specific number of years. Letter from the probation supporting or question, individual orientation, opt out for parents. These are points that were raised. And then to look at the benefit for all volunteers. And I think we are talking about all volunteers in terms of the benefit that we get from it. Did I leave out anything? James.
Madam Chair, I want to thank you the way you led us so far. I know others have other thoughts, but I'm just seeing this review of the regulation. I think the policy itself would stay the same, but the regulation is what we're dealing with. We've talked about the language of pilot program, and again, I feel very confident in our administration to guide us through the piloting process. And then if there is a need to do something different, we can come back and deal with it. What I don't want to do is to say that I am so able to determine the school division and the direction of the school division and what's going to really work, and to take that on. I don't see that. What I'm concerned about is that we have young boys and young girls who are failing, who are having difficulties, and FACE is family and community engagement. And we do have persons who want to engage, and I want to leave that right now to our professionals and not dictate to them what should be done beyond giving these parameters, which I see as consistent with the policies that I have looked at from around the Commonwealth, where it is this language, type of language that says maybe, and the maybe is left up to the superintendent.
Ms. Carter?
Also including their orientation for all volunteers.
Yes,
Okay,
that's on the, and James, I hear what you're saying, but it is a board policy. And the policy vote tonight or input tonight, that there's a desire to change that policy, the one that we have. So we do have to make a change. And we've got to decide what that change is going to be.
Yes, ma'am. I guess let me restate.
Okay.
There's a policy, and then there's a regulation. There's two different things.
Right.
The policy is about a paragraph. We didn't deal with that in 2016. We're not dealing with that now. That will stay the same. What we are modifying is the regulation. And someone please correct me if I...
Right, right. Okay. All right, any other, Dr. Simon?
We've mentioned here and there getting feedback from administration and faculty on their views on this, and also, once again, seeking input from parents. Are we in agreement that that's what we want to do? I mean, what's the status of that?
That's
my
a good,
question.
that was something that I had concerns about, but
I think we really do need to obtain the feedback from them, especially after tomorrow when the paper comes out. Fellas, I know, I can see the headline. So we'll be in that little section that we get every week.
Bob.
We'll be in that.
I think that's a really good question. I understand this is before I was involved in the school board, that there was a survey that was done that really did not, apparently, I think, Dr. Sin, you looked at it, was not very good. You know, I think that from the viewpoint of the community that we have had, obviously we understand people who are in support of changing the volunteer policy. This is an open meeting. We do have general comments. There will be an article in the paper at some point. There will be news. I think for people who want to make another statement of this, they should do it the same way everybody else in this community has done it. They should come and they should talk to us. I think it's a complicated issue, and I think it's very hard to do it as a survey. Because like if you say, do you want your child to be in school with someone who's volunteering a history of felony? People, that's who's going to say yes to that? But it's a very complicated topic, as this board well knows, because it's taken years for this to evolve.
I still think it's important that we get that input.
That's fine. So my question is, where do we go from here?
Well, we've made progress tonight with the discussion that we've had.
Right.
I've also heard from several board members that they need time to look at this, to
Right.
have thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that people do that. My suggestion would be that they do that, and that you can either put it in writing or a telephone call, and we can gather it to me, and we can get that information. And then I think at the next board meeting, we come back with an agenda item.
Can I just follow this with one other thing? So, I think that the issue when this was voted on last time was that the regulations were not in place when the vote was done by the board. I mean, I think personally, for me to vote on this, I want to see the real item. I want to see what's
Right,
in
we're
writing
saying
and
the
what's
same
going to be
thing.
handled. It's been vetted through administration. It's been vetted through whatever else the staff should do it. And it comes back to the board in a form that we can actually
See
say,
it.
yes, we agree with that, or we want to change it.
Right.
I think for us to have another discussion about, do we agree with the principles? Do we want to dot the I, cross the T? I think we've had enough of those
you're saying what I was
conversations.
trying to say.
So where will it go that it comes back to? Who will evolve it into a regulation that we can look at?
The regulations go
develop
through the
that?
superintendent.
So I guess my question would be, as I look at the regulation right now, the details of all of what you've talked about are not
In that.
in this regulation. If I also listen to what you said about the divisions that do have a screening process, many of the details of what they do are also not
In our
step by step in their regulation, hence case by case basis, which I think implies that you need some sensitivity in terms of just how you're reviewing it. So I guess I need clarity as to what it is that the board is asking me to do. So I'm hearing that you value my ability to be able to make a decision with the input from a panel to be reflective, to obviously if something isn't right, to stop it right then and there and not let it continue. And if it's working, to talk about that, that's one thing. The second thing is giving me very clear direction as to don't do anything until you have this number of people, this many days of how long it's going to take you. You meet on every Friday. This is the data we want, which is very prescriptive. Or if you're asking me to be prescriptive, which I could be prescriptive and write something down and bring it back to you as my decision, this is what I'm going to do, or as, hey, here it is, now you guys go back and forth. Do you like my step 1? And then you talk about that. Do you like my step 2? Do you like my step 32? Do you talk about that? So I guess I'm also asking, where are we going with this? Because at the governance level, I didn't know whether or not, I heard you say you want some kind of change or modification to the policy. But at the step-by-step level, we're getting down into the nitty gritty of everything. So, you know, I'm trying to take a pulse here and see where we are in terms of managing your expectations, because I can certainly put some stuff offline and start working on a very detailed thing to get it done rather quickly, because I believe our audience does not want me to say, hey, I'm in the middle of budget season and by the time I finish the budget I'll get back to this, which means I would be putting some time into it. But whatever I bring to you, I have to be mindful that if you're expecting a lot of details, then I'm not just putting together an overview. I'm putting together an intensive project that you're going to be looking at every single detail. So what is the will of the board with that, whether or not we're at an overview stage or are we at the nope, put every single detail together stage before I even make a move to go forward with anything?
James?
I support the recommendation of the chair. At one level, I'm hearing that board members need a little bit more time. So if we could determine how much time that is, let everybody either funnel that information to you or
Christy.
or Christy, and then based upon what we've discussed today, that additional information I would entrust, and I'm trying not to compare, but when we made the decision last time to modify the regulation to permit returning citizens to share with a process, and then a process kind of came to us, but of course that superintendent left. We expected the superintendent to do that then. I would think it would be the same. And Dr. Edwards, you would bring something back to us at whatever level of depth you would like to bring, and then that would be something maybe at the January the 14th meeting for discussion, or the February the 7th meeting, whichever one that would makes better sense.
Okay. It's Kim.
One thing I would propose that we might be able to do, given we have a lot of information here, we get a lot of discussion, that what might make your job easier is to do a decision chart, just a flow chart.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be complete. It can show where we're missing information. So, like, are they still on probation? If yes, this. If no, proceed. Whatever. And try to diagram that out and look at where all the questions remain and pull them off of here of the different things we've discussed. So we can kind of get a bird's eye view of what the whole thing looks like. I don't know if that'd be helpful. So that's one thing. As far as feedback from the public and administration and staff, one thing we could take the approach that the federal government does when they have a policy. They write it up and then they have a period of public comment. They present it as it is. People review it and then they can submit comments. And we could just, so it's not a survey, it's self-selected. We'd have to advertise it, make sure it's clear that they have this comment period. And then we collect the information that way.
I like that.
Sharon?
Where does the feedback step come in the insurance piece about how will this impact our insurance?
No, we've already
Oh,
established that it will not.
Okay, so where does the feedback piece come? Where do we put, before, is that where, when we put the, if we do this, is that part of the public comment you're talking about? Okay, so
Yeah.
that could be for everyone, okay. The other thing is, I think what did we say, step by step, or are you just gonna bring it to us, and then what did everyone think about that?
Val?
I would say do what you're comfortable with doing. If you want to do an overview and for us to look at that, that's what we'll look at. If you want to go into steps and want us to look at that, we'll look at that. But I think after listening, you kind of know where we are and what we're doing, and I feel very confident giving it to you and then you bringing us back with where you're comfortable coming back with us. Because we can still talk about it and change things and do stuff, but that's just my point of
Knowing
view.
that we will probably change.
And with the understanding that 9 of us talked through very intelligently something that was very important, and so at that level we didn't vote because this is not a voting piece tonight, of course, but that the board in essence is giving direction. in saying that this is something that we would like to do, and we're asking Dr. Edwards, as Bill said, to do it to the level of her comfortability. Then we'd have something to look at. What I am concerned is not to rush, but once again, I'm thinking about legitimate persons who might be able to pass the muster of this vetting process and getting them involved with kids now, because I'm like Dr. Nillis, I want us to have 100% of our schools accredited. We're just about there, 13 out of 16, right?
Bill?
I will say, our next meeting is the same night that they
the
plan
gun
the
thing.
city council
Yeah.
sanctuary city, public.
Well, our meeting's at 5. They won't start till 7:30.
Okay.
Okay. So
I wanna go
are
to
you
that.
getting a sense of what people are saying? Any other
I want
comments?
to go to the city council meeting.
Thank you all for putting this together and for helping us get through this. So any feedback that you have, please send to our board clerk, and she will keep record of it, and then pass on whatever we comment on to Dr. Edwards.
So just so I have an understanding, when is the public comment period? Is it after I get, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So no one's commenting.
No.
Get some comments.
We might, yeah.
If I can clarify, I'm assuming that we have an almost final or close to final, so that people really know what they're talking about. That was the major flaw of what was done last time. People didn't even know what they were agreeing to. It was not clear at all. So I think when people can see everything, and
Clear? Okay. All right. Any other, like I said,
So are
send
we
them-
shooting for, Madam Chair, are we shooting for January or February for the first reading of this?
I'd say February.
I'm looking at Equity Task Force. They're like, January. I can't even show my face at a meeting if I said February. I'm going to try my best for January.
Okay.
also understand the budget is.
Yes, yes. If nothing else, I can schematically go through, this is what a panel looks like, this is what we might consider, this is da-da-da-da-da. I can take you through some things. Now, I might not have every single, for those of you who like the what if tool, what if, I might not have vetted all the what if, but I think that's part of the case by case basis anyhow.
Anyway.
Because someone's gonna have a what if. So.
But that's the idea behind the schematic, because then you get where you have gaps in what the details are, and all those what ifs can maybe even become a checklist that you go through. Do they meet this, this, this?
Yeah.
If yes, then proceed. Otherwise, stop. Boom, you're out. I mean, we can make it very formulaic in that sense.
Okay, here we go. All right, so we are clear on what we're doing. Okay. Additional board comments? Dr. Coleman?
I don't know if I'm out of order, but you always get me back if I'm out. But I want to congratulate our board member Sharon Carter. She recently defended her work for her Doctor of Education, and so she was successful in that, and we are all proud of you. At the University of Lynchburg.
Good for you. Any other comments? Dr. Gupta?
January 14th, I know we have a finance committee meeting, a school board meeting, and a city council.
Yes, it's too many.
It's too many meetings, so maybe we
Move
can
the
change
finance.
finance committee meeting move to a different meeting.
Okay.
One more thing. I'm gonna say it at the other meeting. But I am so proud of Dr. Ben Copeland in the Scrooge. I'm gonna say it again at the next meeting, but that was phenomenal. And he can sing and act and all of that. I mean, it was just really wonderful.
Thank you. It's awesome working with a group of students that are so dedicated to what they do. It's an experience that you remember for a long time.
Yes, Mr. Beatty, all of the folks, it was just excellent.
Well, this is our last meeting for this year. Winter break starts December 23rd and continues through January the 3rd. The next school board meeting is scheduled for January 14th. The next school board work session will be held on January 28th. And the 28th, that's when we receive our board docs training. So I think you need to bring your electronic device, okay? All right, with that, we're adjourned.